The tale starts in a workshop. A boy with blonde hair named Bernie was thrilled to see his project finished at last. He thought it would make life easier for everyone nearby. In front of him was a lamp with a colorful stone inside. Cliff and Lucille strolled over to check if Bernie had created something new. Cliff noted that Bernie was already well known in town, with many saying he was a great support. Lucille happily embraced her little brother. Bernie thought it wasn't that impressive. His dad encouraged him to take more pride in himself, saying he was the family's pride and joy. Hearing this made Bernie even happier. As a skilled magical tool engineer, Bernie vowed to safeguard his beloved country and family. Meanwhile, in a different world and time, a weary man stirred awake to the blaring sound of his smartphone alarm. It was another day for him to head to work, even though he felt like he wasn't doing it for anyone. At the office, he constantly received urgent assignments. He questioned why he was still there. While everyone else headed home, he remained until midnight to wrap up the tasks assigned to him. Once he finished work, he hurried to catch the final train. Just as he believed he had arrived in time, he unexpectedly felt lightheaded while going up the stairs. He stumbled and tumbled down completely. While those nearby freaked out, the man attempted to get up but was unable to. His awareness gradually slipped away, and he realized he was nearing the end. Just before losing consciousness, memories from his early years flooded back. He recalled playing with building blocks by himself. His parents passed away shortly after he was born, leading to him being taken to a care facility. The people around him were nice, but as he got older and saw other kids being adopted, the ache of not having any family became harder to bear. Even after finishing high school, he felt a void in his heart while working for a tough company that took advantage of him. He questioned the meaning of his life. Tears streamed down his face as memories flooded back. He made an effort to move toward the light. If there was another life after this one, he hoped to be born into a caring family and learn how to look after someone like him. As he reached for the light, he gradually became aware. He opened his eyes and noticed someone was calling him Bernie. He felt puzzled, especially when he saw his chubby baby cheeks. His mom said it was time for his milk. The main character felt puzzled as she picked him up. His dad turned to Dorothy and asked if he could give the baby some food, believing their little one would like it. The main character attempted to ask if he was in a hospital, but only infant sounds escaped his lips. He was taken aback by his inability to speak clearly and was puzzled as to why a woman was holding him. Dorothy accused her husband, Scott, of scaring Bernie. As they laid him on the bed, the main character noticed he had become a baby. While sipping milk straight from the bottle, he began to wonder if he was really dead. Everything around him felt odd and unknown, leading him to suspect he might be in a different country. As he explored further, he realized it seemed like a dreamland. He believed he had passed away, but somehow, he found himself as a baby in a strange new world. He questioned whether he had truly come back to life. Then it hit him that the man and woman standing before him were now his mom and dad. Out of the blue, there was a knock at the door. Two children entered, excitedly shouting for their parents as they held up a shiny golden flower they had found. Dorothy mentioned it matched the color of Bernie's hair. The kids shared that they discovered it at a market stand and pooled their money to buy it as a present for Bernie. When the main character heard the kids refer to the couple as mom and dad, he thought they were his older siblings. However, the flower was just one of the many gifts they had. The older sister leaned in closer to Bernie and told him to pay attention. She stayed still, lifted her hands toward him, and said the word, blessing. Light transformed into butterflies that danced around her. As he took in this serene yet vibrant scene, the protagonist suspected that his sister had cast a spell. She then declared she was done and hoped Bernie would have a future full of lasting joy. Dorothy and Scott were taken aback that Lucille could already perform blessing magic. Lucille mentioned that she put in a lot of effort to learn it the day before for Bernie. Her older brother, Cliff, accused her of being selfish for wanting to impress Bernie alone and said he wanted to show off too. Lucille pointed out that Cliff was good with a sword and it wouldn't be safe to practice indoors. Cliff then assured Bernie that he would demonstrate his sword skills later and promised to always keep him safe, no matter what. Lucille claimed she could keep Bernie safe by herself using her magic. Cliff argued that he would take on the role of protector. Bernie lay in Dorothy's embrace, observing the two of them bicker. Scott softly stroked the older kids' heads and remarked on how well they had turned out. They exchanged smiles, their eyes meeting. Cliff made it known that he would always be Lucille's wonderful big brother. Lucille suggested he embrace moments like this with grace. Since they were both so skilled, Dorothy wondered if they could lend a hand with getting dinner ready. The main character felt a wave of emotions wash over him. This was the type of situation he had only seen from a distance before. As Bernie, he found a family and understood he wasn't by himself anymore. Later, they all went on a trip to a new location. Bernie felt thrilled when Scott shared that they would visit the cathedral in the royal capital to assess Bernie's job skills. Since Scott was a blacksmith running a workshop in the capital, they decided to make that their first stop before heading out. Together, As Bernie gazed at the landscape and heard them discuss their work, he understood that he was in a completely different reality. During a brief pause, Cliff practiced with his wooden sword, hitting a rock he had set up as a target. Bernie glanced at his dad and wanted to know what his brother was up to, but Scott just said that Cliff was busy with his regular training. Cliff had a talent for sword fighting and dreamed of being an adventurer who would explore dungeons around the globe. Scott pointed out that Lucille had a natural skill for becoming a mage and was already displaying her magical talents. Each person had abilities tied to their work, and both siblings practiced daily to achieve their goals. Bernie admired them, despite their youth. Then he recalled that his father had been a blacksmith, leaving no one to take over the shop. Scott enthusiastically shared how he crafted Cliff's practice sword. Bernie attempted to inquire about the future of the workshop, but only baby noises escaped his lips. Scott believed Bernie was keen on the workshop since he kept gesturing toward it. However, he apologized and said there were many hazards inside, so he couldn't let him in just yet. Bernie wanted to clarify that wasn't his intention at all, but he struggled to express himself clearly. Scott told him not to sulk. If the evaluation revealed that Bernie had a talent for making things, he would gladly make an exception and take him to see the workshop. He expressed his hope for Bernie to follow the life path he genuinely desired. This made Bernie think about what kind of job and abilities he might have. At that moment, Cliff's practice sword snapped. He felt upset because his dad had put in a lot of effort to create it for him. Bernie felt anxious when he noticed his older brother in tears. He thought about whether he could use the unusual ability he didn't quite grasp yet to help. As he considered repairing the sword, a menu popped up in front of him. He didn't quite grasp its meaning, but it seemed like he could pick from different choices, much like a game interface. He spotted something called the reincarnation bonus. When he looked at the details, a skill called improved repair showed up. It might serve as his reward for being reborn. From the term repair, Bernie realized what it could mean. Now that he was in a magical world, he believed that repairing the sword was actually achievable. He looked over the supplies he would need. The display indicated that one magic ore was needed. Bernie didn't possess anything like that. Out of nowhere, he noticed Cliff's necklace shining. He made little noises to grab his brother's focus. Cliff dried his tears and glanced at him, feeling a bit shy about revealing his vulnerable side. Bernie saw that his brother couldn't see the shine from the necklace, which made him even more convinced that he had some sort of special ability. He still wasn't sure what he could do, but for the family that loved him so much, he was willing to give anything a shot. Bernie picked up the necklace and aimed his left hand at the shattered sword. Cliff attempted to push the sword aside, but it lifted into the air by itself. Bernie focused his thoughts, and the training sword was fixed in no time. Cliff was taken aback. Bernie was glad to see that the sword appeared ordinary once more. Cliff grabbed the fixed sword and examined it. It felt unique in his hands. He swung his sword at the big training rock and cut it in two as if it were made of butter. The two brothers were amazed. Cliff faced Bernie with enthusiasm and shared that he had witnessed the event. He was convinced that he had managed to slice the boulder thanks to Bernie's support. Scott and Dorothy stepped out of the workshop after hearing the commotion and inquired about what was going on. Scott's gaze fell upon the neatly cut boulder. Cliff shared that Bernie had repaired his sword, which he then used to smash the rock. Scott inspected the sword and glanced at Bernie, who still looked stunned by the events that unfolded when he tapped into his job's power. Scott placed the sword aside and approached his sons, relieved that they were both safe. He told Cliff that he hadn't broken the rock alone, so he should keep up with his special training. At the cathedral, Scott warmly welcomed a priest and expressed his gratitude ahead of time. The priest was glad to see him and inquired about Dorothy's well-being. Dorothy mentioned she was fine and appreciated his care. Then, the priest turned his attention to Bernie, the main reason for their visit. He picked up Bernie and saw that the child seemed healthy. As they entered the building, the priest shared that this world had something known as jobs. These roles revealed what type of work suited each individual, allowing them to harness abilities related to their job. If someone had talent and underwent special training, they could pursue extraordinary careers. It was common for everyone to undergo the evaluation process soon after they were born to discover their future role. They entered a room featuring a big crystal ball in the middle. The priest mentioned that Cliff was a skilled swordsman and Lucille was a powerful mage. He was curious about what role Joe Bernie would take on. He led Bernie to the crystal ball and encouraged him to reach out and touch it. The same display from earlier popped up, and the crystal ball glimmered brilliantly. Scott inquired about the outcome. The priest replied that Bernie worked as a magical tool engineer. He mentioned it was very unusual since he had never encountered it before. He also pointed out that it was related to Scott's blacksmith work, making Bernie an ideal candidate to take over the workshop. Still, Scott didn't want to push that. He believed Bernie should choose his own path. As a dad, he aimed to honor and back whatever direction his kids decided to take. Lucille and Cliff were touched by their father's words, and Dorothy could see just how joyful Scott really was. Bernie realized something significant. Coming into this world was an opportunity for someone who once felt isolated. He aimed to safeguard the joy he shared with his family. He silently vowed to become an excellent magical toolmaker and build his strength to support them. A year went by. Cliff improved his sword skills significantly by practicing every day. He was breaking rocks with a regular practice sword. It looked like Scott had already connected him with an adventurer. Bernie still had a lot to learn about being a magical tool engineer. He had a couple of opportunities to try out his unusual ability, like mending a shattered plate, but his family wouldn't let him. Seeing his older brother put in so much effort, Bernie understood that there was no need to hurry. This day was special too, as they had a family day lined up. The family took a carriage to a place Scott picked out. He mentioned that Lucille was about to start at the academy, and they would really miss her. Dorothy nodded and mentioned that was the reason they were spending time together before her departure. Lucille felt a bit down, but she got it. Bernie recalled that his older sister was now 7 years old. As a grand maid, she didn't have to take the entrance exam for the Royal Academy, and she was all set to start next week. At first, she looked thrilled, but she couldn't shake off the sadness of leaving her family. The academy was a boarding school, and she would only be able to see them during extended breaks. Bernie thought about whether she was feeling alone. Cliff playfully tousled Lucille's hair to lift her spirits. She appeared moved and wore a brighter smile. Bernie felt a sense of relief. He had a little idea for later and wanted to create lots of memories with his sister. Their family reached a peaceful lake with sparkling water. Scott mentioned he found a secret place close to the royal capital during his days as an adventurer. He shared that the Royal Magic Corps had set up a barrier around it, keeping monsters away. Only the toughest and smartest beings could occasionally get through, but they rarely ventured near human settlements. Bernie was taken aback to learn that his father had once been an adventurer. The thought of dungeons and monsters seemed risky, yet it sparked his interest. Scott then told Dorothy about giving Bernie a charm and pointed out that Cliff needed a new one since the magic in his old charm was gone. Dorothy gave Bernie a charm that resembled Cliff's old one. Scott mentioned it was a protective charm crafted from magical ore, but he thought Bernie would likely find his own use for it again. Bernie understood that his dad was referring to his special ability. After that, Scott pretended to be clueless and suggested that everyone go for a stroll by the lake. The entire family strolled around the lake. They spotted a tiny squirrel munching on some nuts. They discovered a field full of flowers and crafted flower crowns together. After that, they arrived at a fishing area where Scott, Cliff, and Lucille attempted to catch some fish. Lucille felt a tug on her fishing line, and with Scott and Cliff's help, she reeled in a large fish. They prepared and grilled it immediately. Bernie nearly drooled at the sight. Lucille happily mentioned that it was the fish she caught and that she helped Bernie appreciate it. Cliff pointed out that she only made the catch because he was there to back her up. Lucille mentioned that their dad pitched in too, but she was the one who caught the fish in the end. Bernie recognized he needed to stay focused and not get sidetracked again. He then expressed his admiration for them, saying how incredible they were. He made sure to mention that both his older brother and sister were truly remarkable. Lucille was taken aback when she heard Bernie speak so clearly. Bernie felt joyful that he could finally express himself a bit more. Cliff praised him, saying he was incredible, while Lucille stood there in shock for a bit. Dorothy softly tapped her on the back, feeling happy that Lucille heard Bernie refer to her as his big sister before heading off to the academy. Lucille was beaming with joy, and Bernie shared her happiness. He wished they could create lasting memories together. Once they finished eating, Cliff asked his parents if he could take Lucille and Bernie for a quick stroll. Scott agreed but reminded him to stay close. The three siblings strolled side by side. Lucille recalled their dad introducing Cliff to an explorer and wondered how it turned out. Cliff shared that the rules stated he couldn't be an adventurer until he was 13. At just 9, he was still learning from his mentor, so he had to wait a bit longer before he could venture into dungeons or embark on real quests. Lucille realized it was similar to training for exploring dungeons. Cliff explained that dungeons weren't easy to access since not every area had the same safe boundaries as the one by the lake. Still, Lucille couldn't understand why he was drawn to such risky locations. Cliff mentioned he had a goal he wanted to achieve and another reason he kept to himself. Lucille was eager to learn more, but he cut the conversation short, making her even more intrigued. Bernie grinned as his older siblings bickered, but then he spotted something by the bushes. He sensed something was lurking and tried to catch his siblings' attention. Cliff assumed Bernie was simply being curious and thought it was just an animal. Suddenly, a gigantic creature emerged. The three siblings were taken aback. A massive wolf faced them, much larger than any ordinary one. Bernie believed it was a beast, but then he recalled the barrier meant to keep such things away. Lucille asked Cliff for advice on what to do next. Cliff replied that she should stick close to him and stay with Bernie. She became anxious when it seemed like he intended to battle the creature. Cliff assured her he would just keep it occupied and urged her to grab Bernie and escape to their parents. Lucille thought she couldn't go through with it because it would leave him by himself. Bernie saw Cliff's legs trembling and began to think about how they could all make it out together. The wolf suddenly stepped closer. Cliff attempted to confront it, but the animal seemed weary and glanced away. Bernie saw this and understood that it wasn't aggressive. It looked like it was suffering. Cliff urged Lucille to take the chance to get away, but she still wouldn't abandon him. Bernie realized that this wolf was no typical beast. He recalled his father saying that the barrier mainly affected monsters, but not those that were highly intelligent or powerful. It was logical that a being like this could get through, and if it was smart, they might find a way to talk to it. Just then, Bernie's magic stone charm glowed intensely. The hovering screen seemed to respond to everything happening nearby. He figured he could take advantage of this to get away from the predicament. He picked up his scarf and combined it with the magic stone. The bright light caught the eye of his older siblings. When the scarf stopped shining, Lucille was puzzled about what just occurred. Bernie made gentle baby noises, and Cliff somehow realized that Bernie wanted them to put the scarf on the creature. Bernie responded with more baby noises. Lucille wanted to intervene, worried it could be risky, but Cliff felt reassured by Bernie, as the monster wasn't threatening them at all. As Cliff approached the wolf, he expressed his regret for aiming his sword at it before and assured it he wouldn't hurt it if it remained calm. To demonstrate his sincerity, he requested the wolf to put on the scarf. The wolf crouched down softly. Cliff expressed his gratitude and mentioned that the scarf he was placing on the wolf was made by his younger brother. The wolf agreed and said it was pretty good. Cliff was happy to hear the wolf enjoyed it. The wolf introduced himself as Albaros, the holy creature, and asked if they would hear his plea. Cliff attempted to respond about the request but then saw something unusual. He and the others found it hard to accept that the wolf could talk and that it had been a magical creature all along. Albaros figured out that his words were clear thanks to the scarf, so he turned to Bernie to confirm if that was true. Bernie was happy that his translator worked, but he was curious about what the mysterious creature wanted. Lucille then asked Albaros if he was okay. Noticing that he seemed to be in distress, Albaros shared that he had become unwell and went to the lake to recuperate, but he couldn't control his body. He inquired if they had any potions with them. Lucille thought it might be due to a magical toxin. Cliff wanted to know what she meant by that. Lucille described it as a toxin that tainted the magic within a person. When this occurred, they would gradually start to lose control over their own body. She mentioned that magic poison could happen on its own or be made nearby. Cliff then realized how serious the situation was. Lucille insisted they should inform their father so he could notify the Royal Magic Corps immediately. Before doing that, she requested Albaros to stay still. She wrapped her arms around him, using her magic to help him heal. Albaros expressed his gratitude and mentioned that he felt improved. Cliff was taken aback to see her using healing magic. Lucille explained that she hadn't fully mastered it yet, but she picked up the basics for times when her family needed help. Cliff called her incredible. Albaros expressed his gratitude for their assistance and inquired if they needed anything in return. Lucille quickly invited the magical creature to stay with them. Cliff and Bernie were taken aback. Bernie thought Lucille had a smart excuse, but she just wanted to have a pet dog at home. The rest were left in shock. Cliff noted that Albaros wasn't a dog and had his own desires. To their surprise, Albaros was receptive to the thought, since he had been curious about life among humans. Not long after, the siblings invited Albaros to join them and asked their parents if they could bring him home. Scott turned to his wife to hear her opinion. Dorothy said yes, because she thought it would attract positive interest in the workshop. Bernie was shocked that his mom wanted to make a sacred creature into a mascot. Cliff began to call Albaros by the nickname Al. Scott grew more curious about the scarf that Bernie had crafted. He thought Bernie had put in a lot of effort to look out for his older brothers and sisters. He picked Bernie up and expressed his gratitude. With everyone on board, he understood that he had to accept Al into the family. Al mentioned it was his way of showing gratitude for their support. From that day on, he vowed to keep them safe as a member of their family. Time went by, and the family expanded. Lucille attended the school. Cliff kept practicing with his sword. Bernie started honing his abilities. They followed their unique journeys to achieve their dreams. In a grand house, someone got word that the cause of the magic poison spread from years back had been dealt with. However, there were still hints that it might resurface. They intended to explore the region with the Royal Magic Corps and sought Lord Zolan's permission. When Zolan heard the term magic poison, a smile spread across his face. One day, Bernie's dad asked him to make a quick delivery, promising him a magic ore as a reward. Bernie was thrilled and invited Al to join him. As they traveled, Al saw how excited Bernie was about the prize. Bernie shared that magic ore was crucial for his job as a magical tool engineer. In recent years, Bernie gradually realized the true strength of his role. It was valuable for building and repairing things. There were certain requirements for creating items with unique features. The first requirement involved recipes and their levels. He had to discover recipes that revealed the ingredients and techniques he needed. These recipes became available as he advanced in his job, so Bernie was gaining levels by doing regular repair tasks. The second requirement was magic ore. Regardless of how much he leveled up, he needed magic ore to unlock special abilities. Mining production had decreased, and prices had surged, making it tough to obtain magic ore. While some extra cash was helpful, it would still take Bernie quite a while to save enough to buy it himself. Al pointed out to Bernie that everyone recognized his strong work ethic. The pair eventually arrived at the nearby town. Bernie scanned the area and spotted the location for his delivery. Once he completed the job, he expressed his gratitude to Al for the assistance and suggested they grab dinner somewhere. Al proposed they try T-bone steak, and Bernie decided to use his savings meant for magic ore. They quickly walked into a restaurant where a friendly auntie greeted them. Bernie chose an omelet rice and a T-bone steak. The auntie mentioned she would have Dorothy bring their food. Dorothy popped her head out of the kitchen and waved cheerfully. Al felt a wave of relief seeing that she looked happier. Bernie agreed because her health had been fragile in the past, but it seemed to be getting better recently. He heard she was now the star of the diner. While reflecting on this, he noticed that she had become healthier since Al became part of their family. He quietly speculated whether a magical creature brought some sort of blessing. When Al inquired if anything was bothering him, Bernie replied that it was nothing. At that moment, the diner auntie greeted a new customer. It was Cliff and a girl named Petty. Cliff mentioned it was a surprise to run into them and inquired if Bernie was assisting their dad again. Bernie mentioned he had just wrapped up. Petty replied it had been some time and suggested they share a meal. Cliff thought Petty would choose the same turkey burger he wanted, so he headed to order. Bernie leaned in close to Petty and quietly said he was sorry for messing up their date. Petty turned red and said it was okay. When Cliff came back and tried to find out what she wanted to order, he got puzzled by her flushed cheeks. Petty explained to Bernie that she and Cliff were just friends. Cliff backed her up with a serious expression, which only made Petty feel down. Al recalled that they were both already 14 and members of the adventurer group known as Kangaroo. He thought that young people often had opportunities to connect, but Cliff appeared oblivious to it all. Bernie pointed out that Petty was Zach's daughter, who was the leader. Zach cared deeply for his daughter and also had a fondness for Cliff, who viewed Zach as a father figure. Perhaps Petty viewed Cliff as part of his family. Bernie then inquired with his brother about whether he planned to go on an adventure later. Cliff declined and mentioned that they had just completed a task to collect herbs and were on their way back to the guild to give their report. Petty attempted to say they would collect magic ore next, but Cliff interrupted her and covered her mouth with his hand. This left Petty feeling uneasy. Bernie was convinced he heard her mention magic or gathering and shot a glare at his brother. Magic ore was costly to purchase, but collecting it for free was an option. If he could find some, he could use the recipes he had discovered to improve his skills. He wanted to ask his older brother something, but Cliff cut him off and said no. Cliff realized Bernie was about to request to join him. Bernie felt let down. Cliff told him that being curious was great, but he also pointed out that he was just 6 years old. Although magic, the gathering didn't require exploring dungeons, there was still a chance they could encounter monsters. Cliff was anxious that something bad might occur, and their dad would be upset. Petty felt joyful after kissing Cliff's hand. She told Cliff to relax and quietly assured Bernie that she would support him like a big sister. She reminded Cliff of Kajaris's rule that stated any strange occurrences at the party should be reported to the leader. This meant the leader was the one who made all the decisions. Cliff understood the guideline but mentioned that Bernie wasn't the type to seek adventure. At that moment, someone brought their meal and claimed it was good. It was Dorothy. She pointed out to Cliff that he used to dash around all the time when he first began. If he was so concerned, he ought to look out for his brother on his own. Cliff mentioned that was already anticipated. Dorothy pointed out that Scott used to be on Zach's team, and if Zach was okay with it, Scott would be too. She took Bernie's little hands and encouraged him to express his real emotions. Bernie recalled why he required magic ore. It was essential for his development as a magical tool engineer. He nodded at his mother with a strong, assured expression. Dorothy then suggested they head to the guild together first. Before long, they headed to the Adventurers Guild. It was Bernie's first visit. He told himself to stay focused and wait for the leader's approval first. Cliff invited him to join him at a nearby inn that Kangaroo used as their headquarters. He mentioned that it could be intimidating at the beginning and advised him to stay calm. Petty explained that the leader might seem strong and somewhat like a gang leader, but that wasn't his true nature at all. Bernie felt that her comments weren't very helpful. They quickly arrived at a door, and the two young explorers stepped in first. Everyone was glad to see them come back unharmed. Bernie gasped when he spotted the man in front of him wearing an eye patch. He was in charge of Kangaroo. Zach Petty referred to him as someone who always fretted. Zach mentioned that sometimes the easiest things can be the toughest. He then inquired about the identity of the little boy. Bernie stood tall. Zach leaned in closer and saw how much he resembled Dorothy. Bernie introduced himself. Cliff mentioned that Bernie was his brother, and they had something to ask the boss. Zach inquired about the type of request. Petty urged her dad to quit staring so intensely and frightening Bernie. Zach insisted he wasn't scowling, and repeated his request. Bernie shouted that he wanted to team up with Cliff and Petty for their magic-gathering adventure. Zach raised an eyebrow and asked why, his gaze intense. Bernie found him quite intimidating, but he knew he had to ask for approval. He encouraged himself to be courageous. Then he shared that he worked as a magical tool engineer and aimed to collect magic ore from this adventure to gradually enhance his abilities. He expressed his desire to be a skilled magical tool engineer. Before long, he reminded himself to stay true to his words. He expressed his desire to help his family. Everyone fell quiet. Zach grinned and softly stroked Bernie's head, telling him he had succeeded. Bernie felt grateful. Zach said his longtime buddy Scott loved to boast about his kids and had faith in them. Bernie had just demonstrated that trust, and it was already more than enough for him. Cliff and Bernie were hearing their dad say he was proud of them for the first time. However, Zach pointed out that just having Cliff and Petty as parents wouldn't be enough. He invited a young man named Joseph to come along. Zach mentioned that although Joseph was young, he was talented and would serve as their guide. He warned them to stay safe. Later, the boys shared their adventure with their parents, and Scott found out that Zach had already given his thumbs up. Bernie asked Scott if it was okay, because he wanted to expand. Scott remained anxious about the possibility of monsters showing up. Cliff promised to look after his big brother if anything went wrong. He vowed to bring Bernie back home safely and asked his dad to have faith in them. Dorothy rested against Scott and remarked how much their kids had thrived. Zach nodded with a grin, noting how quickly they seemed to grow up. The following day, Scott told Joseph he was relying on him. Before the kids headed out, he gave them a warm hug and gently nudged them ahead. The two boys grinned at one another and set off on their first adventure. As they traveled, Joseph steered the carriage and mentioned it would take 2 hours to arrive at Rodney Valley, the place where the magical ore was located. He recommended they take a break while they had the chance. Cliff appreciated the advice. While on their journey, Bernie spotted a no-entry sign on a nearby trail. Al pointed out that this trail was the one that took them to the spot where they first met. Bernie thought it had to do with the enchanted poison. Joseph shared that 5 years back, when the enchanted poison was discovered in that forest, the Royal Magic Corps spent an entire year looking into it. The trade paths were said to be secure, but people still thought the forest and lake regions were polluted. Bernie got why those areas were restricted. Still, it was the place where he first encountered Al, and thinking about it brought him sadness. Before long, the group arrived at their goal. Joseph informed the younger kids that it was time to collect the magic ore. Bernie was thrilled, but a dark figure silently observed them from afar. Bernie gazed around Rodney Valley with wonder. He found the area stunning as he discovered the source of the magical ores. Joseph alerted the team that weaker monsters could show up and reminded everyone to be watchful. Their initial goal was to locate the ore deposit. Bernie wanted to take care of that section since he had something ready to use. He pulled out a compass bracelet. Cliff recalled how Bernie had worked late into the night on a project and was curious about it. Bernie turned on the compass, and a bright beam of light shot out, indicating a single direction. Petty gazed at the light, curious about what it was for. Bernie clarified that it was a special device that found magical ore and revealed where it was located. He thought it would assist them in their search. Joseph found the tool fascinating and was eager to explore its capabilities. Bernie led the team as he tracked the glowing light. Eventually, they arrived at a spot rich with enchanted ore. Everyone was amazed. Bernie felt a sense of pride because the hard work he put into handling the magic ore from his tasks had paid off. Joseph mentioned that the enchanted tool was handy and asked if Bernie could create weapons too. Bernie replied that his work had certain boundaries, but with the right supplies, it could be done. Cliff verified that Bernie crafted his sword. Joseph wished he could get one too. After discovering the site, he urged everyone to quickly collect the magical ore. Everyone started digging up the ore. Petty was trying to grab a piece when Cliff casually assisted her from behind, causing her to blush. Joseph saw this and chuckled. Bernie and Al collected magic ore. With Bernie's enchanted tool, they easily found another site to explore. Joseph was astonished by how much they gathered in such a brief period. With the new tool, they didn't have to depend on tricky detection spells anymore. He mentioned that the tool could potentially match the top experts at the Royal Academy in detection magic. Petty thought Bernie could hold his own against many other professions thanks to his tools. Bernie appreciated their compliments, but he still doubted whether he could live up to his older sister, Lucille. Joseph then recalled that Lucille was Cliff's sister and that Cliff had contributed to her tuition fees. Cliff attempted to interrupt him, but he was too slow. Bernie questioned what he meant by tuition since Lucille's costs were completely covered. Cliff had to clarify the situation. Lucille was a unique student with a scholarship, but it didn't pay for all her expenses. It wasn't a huge sum to cover. Still, he understood how hard their dad labored for Lucille's future. Cliff wanted to be a real adventurer quickly to support his family's money needs. Bernie understood that this was the dream Cliff had hidden from Lucille long ago. Cliff told Bernie not to feel down. He shared that he had a dream of being the best adventurer in the world, exploring uncharted lands, discovering hidden gems, and rescuing others from creatures. The thought of such adventures thrilled him. He cherished his family and aimed to keep everyone he loved safe. He was determined to achieve both of these dreams. He could quickly make money and expand the workshop further. Bernie then expressed his desire to contribute as well. He vowed to be the top magical toolmaker in the royal city and help their family. Cliff held him close. The others observed him behaving like a caring big brother. Then, Petty spotted something unusual. Weapons lay scattered on the ground, covered in dirt. She questioned why they were abandoned in such a spot. She requested Joseph to check it out. Joseph believed they were leftover weapons from those who had faced monsters. He thought those people could still be close by, and since they had collected plenty of magic ore, he recommended they leave soon. The moment he instructed everyone to head out, Al growled, feeling something lurking nearby. Joseph swiftly commanded everyone to get ready and drew his sword. Cliff and Petty immediately joined him. Bernie felt puzzled as he tried to understand why they were behaving so strangely. Suddenly, a massive, gorilla-like creature emerged and struck the ground where they had just been. Everyone narrowly escaped, and Al quickly grabbed Bernie and pulled him to safety. They were all stunned to see the furious monster bellowing at them. Joseph nervously thought about why that creature was nearby. The monster began smashing everything in sight. Al urged Bernie to hop on his back since they had to go immediately. Joseph replied that they would handle the monster themselves. He and the group encouraged Al to leave while they battled the beast. The monster took serious damage, but it quickly retaliated. The creature lunged at Joseph with its sharp claws. At that instant, he saw the monster's injuries starting to mend. Cliff leaped over the monster's head and shouted to the others to keep it from getting back on its feet. The monster saw him and struck, knocking him toward a nearby cliff. It shifted to a small fight. She attempted to stand up for herself but was quickly pushed down and tumbled across the dirt. Bernie felt anxious for both of them. Joseph tossed a smoke bomb at the creature, obscuring its view. He instructed Cliff and Petty to grab Bernie and Al and make a run for it. They were taken aback. He instructed them to head to the royal city and seek assistance. He would keep the monster at bay until they returned. Petty urged them to stay, saying he wouldn't be safe on his own. Cliff agreed and wanted to lend a hand too. Joseph urged them to be wise. He explained that it was the elders' responsibility to look after the young ones, which is why the leader chose him to accompany them during times like these. He pushed them to go before the smoke disappeared, leaving them no option but to obey. Joseph faced the beast by himself. Everyone realized he intended to end his life alone. Bernie was aware of it as well. If they lingered any longer, Joseph's determination would be lost. Still, Bernie couldn't abandon a fellow soldier. A section of the cliff crumbled, sending rocks tumbling down towards Bernie. Al swiftly shielded him from the falling debris. He said the creature was a strange kind that could easily defeat him if he tried to battle while keeping everyone safe. He asked Bernie to decide if they should run away or keep fighting. Bernie's special tool lit up and indicated something. It responded to an item hidden beneath the freshly revealed cliff. The light was bright, leading Bernie to think it wasn't ordinary magic. He figured it must be a powerful magic ore. With that thought, he felt inspired to create something that could change the situation. He scanned the area and saw the discarded weapons. He urged Al to take action. Al quickly sprang into action, charging at the creature and forcing it toward a nearby cliff, where he held it down. Bernie turned to Joseph and asked if he could keep the monster busy for 3 minutes. Joseph got upset and insisted they needed to get away. Bernie took his hands and reminded him that he still had his skills as a magical tool engineer. He told him they were a team, so Joseph shouldn't face death alone. They would all survive and come back together. He urged Joseph to have faith in him. Bernie's unexpected display of feelings caught everyone off guard. Joseph chuckled, but Bernie quickly reminded him that it wasn't a laughing matter. Joseph agreed with Bernie. He realized that if he couldn't trust his friend, he would just be seen as weak. He wished Bernie could craft a solid weapon for him when they got back to the royal capital. If things went badly, he wanted Bernie to fall back with Al and asked Cliff and Petty for their support. They both nodded in agreement. Joseph then offered to give Bernie 3 minutes. They all lifted their swords for him. While Al kept the monster busy, Bernie announced that he would team up with Al to make a magical device and asked everyone to give them 3 minutes. Joseph instructed Cliff and Petty to team up and strike when the enemy was focused on him. Shortly after, Bernie summoned Al back. As Al walked past, he encouraged Cliff to have faith in himself. Cliff just nodded in response. The three explorers rushed ahead. Bernie asked Al to grab the powerful magic ore from the rock wall. He reached for the old weapons close by. As he watched Bernie in action, Cliff found it hard to accept that he needed to depend on his younger brother, who was still so small, to get them out of this mess. He felt miserable for not being able to keep his loved ones safe. Then he noticed Bernie struggling to hold on to the heavy weapons as he started to lose his balance. Despite everything, Bernie's unwavering look remained. This made Cliff understand that it wasn't the moment to give up. As he evaded the creature's strike, he recalled the reason for his training. It was all for the sake of those in front of him, his loved ones. The brave explorer he aspired to be never lost hope in tough times and always stood his ground. Cliff swiftly struck the monster's eye with accuracy. He wouldn't let go of his own possibilities. The creature was left in the dark. Joseph pointed out that Cliff had erred by going solo, yet he still commended him and told Petty to strike next. As the others battled the creature, Bernie collected whatever he could find. Suddenly, a magical stone fell into his hands. Al showed up just in time. Bernie was astonished by the shining light from the powerful magic ore. He then started mixing it with the weapons. The beast slashed with its pointed claws and let out a thunderous roar. Then, it rushed toward Cliff. Bernie called out to him with concern. Cliff recalled Al's advice about having faith in himself. To his surprise, he chose to stop the monster's strike and caught its claws with his sword. The impact pushed him back until the other two came to his side and helped him defend against the claws. The three of them worked together to shove the monster away, but they were quickly overpowered and their weapons shattered at the same time. The monster then swung its fist, knocking them all to the ground. While they lay out cold with their shattered weapons strewn about, the creature grinned and searched for Bernie, but he was nowhere in sight. Nevertheless, Cliff informed the creature that it was unfortunate it had been defeated. As Bernie soared above the beast, he knew he couldn't let this opportunity slip away. With a cannon resting on his shoulder, he took aim and fired at the creature below. The creature froze, bewildered, as a bright light shot through its chest. A gap formed in its body, and it collapsed to the ground with a loud thump. Bernie questioned if that was the end. Suddenly, something erupted from the creature's injury. Cliff warned everyone to keep their mouths shut because it was enchanted poison. Bernie was puzzled and questioned why such poison was present nearby. The heavy fog quickly vanished into the distance. Bernie attempted to ask if it was finished, but Cliff wrapped his arms around him firmly. Bernie was confused until he heard Cliff let out a sigh of relief, happy that his little brother was okay. Bernie started to cry as well and said it was time to head home. Despite that, Joseph sensed something was off with the sudden appearance of a strange monster and magical poison in a supposedly safe area. However, for now, their survival was what mattered most. In the woods close by, a man in a hood, wearing unique earrings, looked unhappy about what had occurred. The event in Rodney Valley had finally wrapped up. They agreed to close off the whole valley in the woods. Cliff, Bernie, and Al headed home, their faces filled with concern. Rather than reprimanding them, Scott and Dorothy embraced them with a friendly hug. They hoped to get back to their calm routine. Bernie crafted a new sword for Joseph and Petty. He also told their tale to the folks at the diner. One day at the diner, he saw that it was surprisingly quiet, even though it was lunchtime. The waitress joked that the spot was saved for Bernie again, playfully saying he was the only customer around. She shared that ever since the attack on Bernie and the group, people had stopped visiting, and it had been some time. Bernie recalled that many of the customers were adventurers. Auntie verified that many had relocated from the royal capital since the Rodney Valley, where they could mine magic ores safely, was now off limits. Stores that depended on adventurers for customers were having a tough time. Bernie and Al felt down when they heard that. He said sorry for mentioning something so sad and asked if they wanted to get some food. On their way home, Al wondered if anyone was still looking into the magic poison. Its impact had already reached the royal capital, and finding a fix wouldn't be simple. He thought about what he could do to make a difference. Al wished there would be a reason for adventurers to linger in the city. As they arrived home, they spotted a crowd forming outside. Scott looked at the gathering and decided it was the perfect time for him to go back. Bernie inquired about the situation. The explorers wanted to confirm if he was indeed Bernie and asked if he could craft weapons for them too. They mentioned they learned about him from Joseph at Kaguru and that his weapons were the finest in the royal capital. Bernie felt pleased to hear that. He suddenly understood something crucial. If the weapons he created gained popularity with adventurers, more people might begin to travel to the capital to buy them. If that took place, it would boost the workshop's growth and also assist his father. He understood there was a way he could contribute as a magical tool designer. He requested his dad to allow him to handle the task. He promised to take complete charge and create the weapons for everyone. Scott beamed with pride and gently ruffled his son's hair. He offered his assistance and asked if Bernie was prepared, as things were about to get even more hectic. The explorers eagerly shared their requests, but Bernie urged them to settle down. At the same time, a cloaked figure approached Professor Evans at the academy. He was an expert in ecology and had spent years researching magical toxins. The man in the hood informed Evans that the enchanted poison could have taken on a new power. Evans, filled with curiosity, eagerly asked what it was. The man grinned as his distinctive earrings sparkled. He was the same guy from before. He glanced out the window and spotted Lucille sitting on a bench with a friend. He requested Evans to help with his experiment. It had been some time since the event in Rodney Valley, yet Bernie sensed that matters were deteriorating. The streets and shops appeared dull and empty. Bernie realized he could only do his best, and Al was on the same page. They entered Kagaru's base, where Joseph greeted them warmly. Bernie gave Zach the things he asked for. Zach appreciated his help and proposed they do a quick activity before he headed back. Joseph pointed out that Bernie's weapons were in high demand, with many adventurers in the capital eager to get their hands on them, not just Kagaru's team. Bernie expressed his gratitude for all the support. Joseph asked why Bernie seemed upset. Bernie explained that the royal capital felt deserted and still. He believed he had to put in more effort. Joseph nodded, mentioning that since that event, fewer adventurers had been coming to the capital. Zach accused Zolan of overreacting and making areas off-limits. Bernie inquired if it was Minister Zolan who decided to shut them down. Zach verified it. He mentioned that the minister had always disapproved of adventurers dealing in magic ore and likely saw this situation as a good opportunity. Nobody had any idea when the area would be safe again, especially with the magic poison at play. The forest that had been closed off 5 years ago was a perfect example, as the investigation there was still uncertain. Additionally, the fees that adventurers owed to the guild had gone up. They were facing unfair treatment, and Zach believed the royal capital would keep getting worse. Al began to feel anxious about Kagaru's future. Zach reassured him that their team had plenty of talent, experience in dealing with monsters, and useful contacts from past relationships to keep them busy. However, beginner groups with younger members faced challenges, particularly as even basic requests seemed to vanish. Bernie understood that new adventurers weren't joining at all. Although he attempted to sell enchanted items, there were boundaries. While he was only interacting with adventurers, Joseph suddenly recalled something important. He advised Bernie to sell the cannon he had built earlier. Bernie mentioned that it would be challenging since the key material was the rare magic ore. They had stumbled upon just one piece, making it impossible to create the same tool in large quantities. It drained nearly all its power in one go, making it impractical. Just then, Scott walked in and searched for Bernie. He mentioned he was only passing through and asked Bernie to come back to the workshop. Zach advised Scott to rejoin the site team if blacksmithing got too tough. Scott advised him to avoid such comments and reminded him that he was no longer working. Zach wished them both the best, and Scott nodded in agreement. As they traveled, Scott asked his son if anything was bothering him. Bernie replied that he was just focused on finding ways to share magical tools with more people, not just adventurers. Scott believed his son was a good person and hoped he could also contribute in a meaningful way. As he pondered this, he spotted a letter in their mailbox. Upon reading it, he discovered it was from Principal Regal. The principal expressed his admiration for the staff Lucille used, praising its excellent quality. He was officially asking for 50 of their sticks for the school. Bernie was surprised they needed that many. The principal requested that they take the magical ore that would come from a magic circle mentioned in the letter. Suddenly, a magic circle appeared nearby and released magical ore onto the ground. Bernie shouted for his dad, and in that instant, Scott understood he had a goal to focus on. He aimed to be the dependable support his sons could count on. He sought Bernie's assistance, and together they headed back to the workshop filled with enthusiasm. At the same time, a bird soared through the sky, carrying a letter attached to its leg. Lucille and her friend sat on a bench chatting about the lovely weather. Her friend nodded in agreement, saying it was just right for a lunch in the garden. Lucille pulled out a sandwich, and her friend saw it was the Academy's special limited edition. She told Lucille she was lucky to have one. Lucille mentioned that she hurried to get it, but she still longed for home-cooked dishes. Her friend pointed out that they would be heading home for summer break soon, and Lucille replied that she was excited about it. At that moment, the bird swooped down to them. They spotted a letter tied to its leg, and when it perched on Lucille's hand, she understood it was a message from her dad. She looked it over and grinned. Her friend figured it must be something positive. Lucille mentioned that it was true and shared that the principal had requested something from her dad. Her dad and younger brother were going to the academy to bring it, and she thought it would be nice if they could all get together. Her friend recalled that Lucille's dad was a blacksmith. Lucille agreed and mentioned that just the other day, while practicing magic with her father's crafted staff, the principal came up to her and remarked that the smooth flow of magic was due to the high quality of the tools. She was surprised when the principal asked her dad for something, Lucille then wished the bird well, and it joyfully took off into the sky. Her friend expressed happiness that Lucille would finally visit her family after a long while. Lucille replied that she was really excited about it. As they headed to their next class, they passed by a group of huge, bull-like creatures locked behind fences. Lucille's friend found it odd that the academy housed monsters on campus. Lucille recalled that they were for studying the environment. She mentioned that while magic prevented the creatures from being unruly, it still felt tense to be close to them. They saw a girl student giving medicine to the monsters, pouring it into a pan. She handled the creature with a calm and steady touch. Lucille's friend recalled that the students dealing with the monsters were in Professor Evans' class. She felt that if she were in their shoes, she would be too frightened and likely flee. While they were walking, one of the monsters suddenly went wild. Lucille attempted to shout for a teacher, but the girl from before cast a spell to soothe the beast. She calmed it down with gentle breaths. Lucille and her friend were amazed. The girl not only halted the monster, but she also used soothing magic without saying a word. Still, Lucille questioned whether it was ordinary magic, as she felt no trace of magical energy. It seemed as if the girl was talking directly to the monster. She continued to soothe it until it eventually settled down. Lucille was amazed and thought the girl might have a special talent. She stepped closer and inquired about the skill she had. Lucille said she was a student in the Magic Studies program and asked the girl her name. The girl replied, "I'm Gina," and quickly ran away, saying sorry. Lucille's friend was curious about why Gina had to leave so quickly. In the meantime, Scott, Bernie, and Al headed out to collect supplies. Bernie attempted to assist with cutting wood, but he was too little to do it properly. He also saw how much effort his dad was putting in. As the days went by, Bernie stayed awake all night lending a hand. Dorothy continued to return, bringing them meals. They finally wrapped up the big order. Scott credited Bernie for staying late and lending a hand. They just had to take the staves to the academy, but transporting them would be a challenge. Bernie mentioned he had a solid idea to tackle the issue. He discovered a recipe that required a big leather bag, metal supplies, and pieces of magic ore. Scott hurried to grab the bag and the metal, mentioning they still had some magic ore bits left from crafting the staves. With everything prepared, Bernie concentrated on his craft. Suddenly, a new suitcase popped up. Scott remarked that it seemed like an ordinary bag. Bernie chuckled and replied that it could appear that way. He unzipped the suitcase, grabbed one of the staffs, and slid it into a hidden compartment where it vanished. Scott was taken aback. Bernie shared that this bag could hold a lot and handle even the biggest items with ease. Scott felt thrilled and hoisted his son up high. Bernie requested not to be seen as a kid. Scott chuckled and pointed out that he was still quite young. He was glad to have his tiny magical gadget maker by his side. After finishing the packing, it was time to take a break. The following day at the academy, the caged monsters began to emit a dense fog, and their eyes were red and angry. Shortly after, Scott, Bernie, and Al made it to the academy without any trouble. Scott anticipated that the person would collect the items by the gate. He glanced around and saw the guards nearby. One of them was Will, a friend of Scott. Will was glad to see him. Scott introduced Will to Bernie, saying they used to work together at Kaguru. Will was happy to see Bernie, who then introduced himself and Al, his special creature. Al told the guard he could check him. Will was amazed. It was his first time encountering a magical creature, and he was even more stunned that it could speak. As Will stroked Al, he inquired about their visit, even though he had already spotted their names on the guest list. Scott explained it was the principal's request and asked to be let in. Will still struggled to accept that a once daring adventurer had turned into a respectable blacksmith. Intrigued, Bernie inquired about the type of adventurer his father had been. Will remembered that, unlike him, Scott had been a talented adventurer, and nearly everyone in the royal capital recognized his name. Will decided to leave because he believed his skills were restricted, while Scott chose to resign in order to provide a steady income for his family. Will admired that decision. Bernie was unaware that his father had done it for their family. Still, Will saw that Scott appeared healthier and more self-assured than he had in the past. Scott informed Bernie that he would take the staves to the principal and suggested that Bernie meet Lucille beforehand. He checked with Will to see if that was okay. The guard verified it. Will then observed them as they walked into the academy. Suddenly, the figure in the hood showed up behind him. Inside the academy, Bernie felt amazed by how roomy the space was. Al inquired whether Bernie had gotten a message from Lucille regarding their meeting spot. Bernie looked at the new note and replied that they would be having lunch in the garden, and there was a map included to show them the way. Out of nowhere, they saw people watching them. Bernie had already filled in their friends in the royal capital. To those who weren't thrill-seekers, Al might seem like just another monster. He got why people saw him that way. Al was still family, and it didn't feel right to see a family member judged like that. Suddenly, Al gave Bernie a quick lick on the cheek, reassuring him not to stress about it. In the garden, Gina couldn't shake off her guilt for leaving the girls behind. She thought about how it was her opportunity to connect with new friends. She recalled how they spotted her chatting with the creatures and still attempted to connect with her. While sitting there, she saw Bernie and Al passing by, deep in conversation. She was taken aback by the view. The two of them then settled down beside her, as it was the most spacious area available. Gina was shocked to think there might be another person like her. She shouted to Bernie and asked if he could communicate with animals. Bernie explained that it was just a special device that acted as a translator. Upon hearing this, Gina's enthusiasm dwindled. When she inquired, Bernie believed she really could communicate with animals. Gina agreed and described it as an unusual gift. She mentioned that people always called her a strange kid because she only chatted with animals. Bernie questioned why they felt that way, as her talent appeared amazing. Gina expressed her gratitude for his thoughtful remarks. She shared that she grew up in a faraway rural area where there were no children her age, so she found friendship with the village animals instead. She wanted to connect with others at the academy, but when someone approached her the other day, she felt frightened and hurried off. She believed she was out of luck. Bernie highlighted how she confidently came up to him and Al, and he felt she was genuinely kind. His comments surprised Gina. As she studied his face closely, he started to remind her of someone she knew. At that moment, someone shouted Bernie's name. It was Lucille. Gina recalled that she was the girl from that moment. This made Bernie understand that Gina was referring to his older sister. Lucille expressed how much she missed them and gave Al a hug. She was eager to find out if Bernie had acted carelessly in the Rodney Valley. Gina attempted to slip away quietly, but accidentally stepped on a twig. The sharp noise made Lucille look up, and she inquired if Gina was with her brother. Gina replied it was just a coincidence. Bernie invited her to join them for lunch and encouraged her to come along. Lucille nodded in agreement. Bernie flashed a quick peace sign at Gina. She finally said yes. They all settled in the garden, and Bernie announced it was time to open the lunchbox. Lucille was puzzled since he wasn't holding anything. Then Bernie surprised him by pulling out a full basket of food from his tiny bag. Lucille discovered it was an enchanting gadget and was pleased that their small magical tool creator was so dependable. She was also amazed to find a variety of fresh sandwiches. Bernie passed along their mother's words to Lucille, reminding her to join everyone for a meal and to look after herself. Lucille felt moved and encouraged them to start eating. Once they finished eating, Lucille and Gina chatted about how Professor Evans specifically requested Gina to handle the monsters. Gina shared that the professor said her talent for communicating with monsters wasn't very helpful at the academy. Bernie anticipated this because the academy housed numerous monsters. Al, feeling anxious, inquired if the monsters ever became aggressive. Gina shared that the monsters were held back by unique magic and had recently received medicine to soothe them and keep them healthy. Lucille was amazed to learn that the academy not only looked after the monsters but also encouraged various research projects in the garden they were in. Certain medicinal herbs were being cultivated for research, and Bernie could already spot them. At the same time, the principal admired the staves and praised them as outstanding. She acknowledged getting 50 of them and wished that Scott could assist the academy again in the future. Scott felt proud to be able to help her. The principal praised Lucille for her impressive accomplishments. Scott wanted to know what she meant by that. She shared that Lucille had outstanding grades and had just received an award for ending the winning streak in a practice battle. Lucille wanted more than just to be a top mage. The principal thought it came from her consistent dedication. Scott was happy to learn that his daughter was putting in the effort. The principal reassured him to relax and let them handle Lucille. Scott had faith in her and stepped away. As soon as he opened the door, the hooded figure stood before him. The man noted that he was quite late but assured him it was still okay. He knocked on the door, and a glowing circle began to appear. Scott inquired about the identity of the figure in the hood. Will lay outside, lifeless in his own blood. The man in the hood mentioned he didn't want to bother the principal or Scott. He addressed Scott using his full name and even brought up Bernie's name. A chill ran down Scott's spine, and he furiously demanded to know how the man knew both his name and his son's. The man in the hood claimed that Bernie had disturbed him recently, so he decided to show up in person. He performed a spell, and the creatures trapped within the academy started to expand. The students nearby yelled in terror. Bernie and the others noticed the cries. A big crowd of students was sprinting away, and they urged others to join them. Bernie was curious about what was going on. Lucille noticed the students running away from the Monster Care Center and dreaded what might have happened. Gina was shocked by the sight before her. The creatures she looked after had grown big and untamed. She questioned why they were behaving this way. Bernie realized the monsters were using magical poison. Lucille lifted her staff and urged them to act quickly. Gina halted her and said she would take care of the monsters on her own. She worked to soothe them. Their eyes went back to normal for a moment but quickly darkened again. They continued their wild rampage and rushed directly at Gina. Lucille rescued Gina and unleashed her ice freeze spell. Jagged ice crystals surrounded the creatures. Lucille promised to freeze them all. Gina urged her to stop, insisting that the monsters weren't naughty kids. She felt guilty for not looking after them properly. Tears streamed down her face as she pleaded with Lucille not to harm them. Lucille hesitated, but another creature lunged at a student nearby. Al showed up just in time and shoved the creature aside. He grabbed the creature's horn and tossed it aside. Then, he urged the student to run away. Bernie assisted with the evacuation. He looked for a way to soothe the creatures instead of fighting them. He looked for a solution to the enchanted toxin. One of the creatures attempted to crush Lucille and Gina. Lucille swiftly activated her improved shield. She wished to delay the monsters just enough to perform healing magic on them. Bernie listened to her suggestion and thought about how he could freeze the monsters in place. He spotted some herbs close by. He shouted to his sister, saying he would create a device to freeze the monsters in place, so she should hang on a little longer. He shared how he discovered the power of working together in Rodney Valley and was eager for them to join forces. Lucille noticed his confidence and felt she could rely on him. Bernie vowed to keep the monsters in check and rode off on Al to get ready. In the principal's office, Scott encountered the strange figure in a hood. Bernie requested Al to show him the location of the anesthetic grass. As they moved along, Al saw injured students weeping and calling for help. Knowing they still had a little time, they rushed ahead. They arrived at a tiny garden where Al caught the whiff of fresh-cut grass. Bernie looked around and quickly spotted the plants. He then took out the charm. Al told him he would return to save the students who were still there and asked if Bernie would be okay on his own. Bernie promised he would wrap up quickly and catch up with him shortly. After Al walked away, Bernie accessed his status window and gazed at the bench nearby. A student fell to the ground, unable to move due to her injuries. A creature lunged towards her. Al got to her just in time, pulled her to safety, and helped her stay calm. Then he charged at another creature and took it down. The students couldn't believe their eyes when the monster they had once dreaded turned out to be their ally. Al fought bravely on his own, but he was overpowered and pierced by the horn of another creature. The students started to feel anxious, questioning whether they should keep running while Al was in trouble. Al was on the verge of being overwhelmed, but a few students turned back and shielded him with protective spells. The boys mentioned they had an idea too. The girls joined in, saying they could work together to protect the academy. Al was taken aback by their strong resolve. Just then, Bernie dashed back and announced that he had finished. As Scott confronted the hooded figure, he could hear the screams coming from outside. His anger flared, and he demanded to know what the hooded man had done. The man claimed it was just a test and insisted that neither Scott nor the principal could get involved. He intended to ensure that Scott wouldn't be able to interfere in any way. A gust of wind surrounded Scott, holding him tight and threatening to rip him apart. The man thought Scott was just a brawler and wouldn't stand a chance against a mage like himself. He believed the once-renowned explorer was simple to manage. Suddenly, Scott disappeared and then appeared behind him, a knife aimed at his throat. He mentioned that the tiny dagger could be used for protection, but it was sharp enough to be deadly. He pressed the man again about what he had done to the students and what he aimed to achieve. The man in the hood was taken aback that Scott had dodged his magic using just his physical power. He applauded and insisted it was merely a test, adding that the rest was irrelevant for Scott to understand. The hooded figure unleashed a powerful spell that sent Scott flying. Scott understood that the spell should have affected the one who cast it, but the hooded man showed no signs of injury. Realizing Scott's speed, the hooded man chose to strike even quicker. Scott managed to evade the magical blows and found the perfect moment to slash at the man's neck, but his knife was stopped. The man in the hood scoffed, saying it was useless, and threw a sphere of dark energy that struck Scott in the gut. The impact sent Scott crashing to the other side of the hallway. The cloaked stranger told Scott that someone like him, who used to be an adventurer, had no hope and should just quit. Scott reflected on his family. He acknowledged his past as an adventurer, but now he was a blacksmith dedicated to safeguarding those he loved. With a quick gesture, a number of swords materialized before him. The man in the hood saw the knife break into several pieces, and the blades shot toward him. He evaded them and complimented Scott on his cleverness. Scott saw another opportunity to attack. The man in the hood moved to the side, but his hood shifted a bit. Scott saw a familiar mark on his back. Meanwhile, on the academy grounds, the students struggled to contain the wild monsters. Out of nowhere, someone shouted for them to duck. Bernie was perched on Al's back, holding a crossbow, and he shot arrows dipped in a unique blend. Every shot zipped toward the creatures like guided arrows, taking them down one by one. Bernie remarked that it was effective. He crafted an enchanting device using numbing grass, mystical ore, benchwood, and iron, and its strength was impressive. Next, he set his sights on new targets. Lucille mentioned she had run out of magic while still maintaining the protective spell. Bernie urged her and Gina to lower their heads. Lucille was glad he was back. Bernie took aim at the creature and shot more paralysis arrows. Multiple arrows struck the giant beast, causing it to topple, yet it managed to remain conscious. Bernie was taken aback. The creature let out a thunderous roar, causing the girls to fall to the ground. Bernie questioned why the sedative wasn't taking effect. A person then inquired about what was going on and why the creatures were affected by a magical poison outbreak. It was Professor Evans. Gina wondered why the monsters behaved like this, even though she always gave them their medicine. Evans found it hard to accept what he was witnessing. He mentioned that the special potion they were giving the animals was meant to soothe them and stop illnesses, based on what someone had informed him. Bernie was curious about who that person might be. When Gina heard that, she understood what really happened. She was the one responsible for the mess because she had provided them with the medicine. She dropped to the floor, feeling guilty. Lucille observed her tears for a bit before getting to her feet. She asked Gina to take a look around. Gina glanced over and noticed the hurt students spread out across the school grounds. Lucille mentioned that everyone was trying hard with what they had. However, Gina was ready to throw in the towel too soon. She encouraged her to be brave if she wanted to rescue the monsters. Then, she asked Bernie to repeat his previous actions while she prepared to use her healing magic at just the right time. Gina felt a deep emotional link to the monsters and had Lucille by her side. She gradually rose to her feet for the sake of those around her. Lucille felt a wave of relief. Gina promised she would help them no matter what happened. Gina grabbed Lucille's wand and channeled her power through it. Staying within the protective barrier, she declared her intention to attempt to connect with the monsters once more. Lucille nodded and instructed Bernie to prepare the anesthetic as soon as she gave the go-ahead. Gina focused her energy and asked the creature if it could hear her. She urged it to take slow breaths like it used to, and assured it that she would stop its pain. She asked it to believe in her, but its eyes darkened once more, and it began to thrash wildly. Gina understood that the enchanted poison was silencing her and preventing her from calling out to the monsters. She wished they could discover a method to lessen its effects. Lucille noticed that the monsters were less agitated, but the risk was still high. Her healing magic was most effective when she was in close proximity, enhancing its power. Her only thought was to maintain the barrier while healing, a combined spell she had never attempted. She felt uncertain about her ability to succeed. Even if she managed to succeed, the healing strength would still be less effective. Still, it was the only approach she could come up with. Gina told her that she had faith in her, just like Lucille did. Lucille nodded, understanding that she had to trust both others and herself. She recalled the earlier events and positioned herself to shield them. She activated a stronger defense spell and then instructed Bernie to move. Bernie let loose his arrows, hitting the beast multiple times. As she recited her spell, Lucille urged him to let her handle the rest. She used a healing spell on the arrows stuck in the monster's skin. As the magic worked, a dense black fog escaped from the monster's mouth. Bernie realized what his sister had just done. Gina took the opportunity to talk to the beast. She said sorry for bringing so much hurt. She understood they never meant to feel this way. She confessed that she had never had friends before, but taking care of the monsters made her time at the academy feel much less lonely. She requested to care for them again after everything was over, as they meant a lot to her. Lucille vowed to stick by her side. Gina grinned, and together they announced their mission to rescue the monsters. They joined forces and assisted the creature in recovering and finding peace. The creature eventually freed itself from the enchanted poison and collapsed to the ground. Gina ran up and embraced it, tears of relief streaming down her face. Lucille fell to the ground, finally feeling the weight lift now that it was finished. Bernie nudged her arm and requested a high five. Lucille grinned and obliged. Scott noticed the symbol on the back of the hooded man. The man tightened his fists and then sprang into action with unexpected quickness, resembling a skilled fighter. Scott avoided the quick punch and attempted to strike back with his knife. They exchanged hits until the man in the hood decided to step back. He expressed his annoyance at Scott's constant trouble. He pushed back his hood, exposing his bald head. He confessed he never intended to take this battle seriously. With a snap of his fingers, a powerful spell formed beneath him. Dense black fog poured from the circle, shaping into what appeared to be a four-winged bird. Scott thought the battle wouldn't be exciting unless both teams took it seriously. The bald man got ready to finish him off. Suddenly, the wall behind him exploded. A person used stronger ropes to tie up both the creature and the bald man. The bald man explained that this was the reason he wanted to keep the principal confined. Principal Regal walked through the shattered wall, her expression stern. She insisted that he own up to the chaos he had caused at her school. The bald man announced that his time was up. Scott felt a surge of anger and questioned whether he was attempting to flee. The man claimed he had achieved sufficient results and that they would reconvene. Scott tried to strike off his head, but the man vanished like smoke. Just before vanishing, he quietly said goodbye to Scott. In a flash, the wrongdoer was gone. At the same time, Evans bowed his head and said he was sorry. He accepted all the blame. Gina wondered if the medicine was the cause of the incident, and Evans agreed it was probably true. He thought that the repeated doses triggered the outburst, though other reasons could have contributed as well. Gina understood that the medicine wasn't meant to stop illnesses. Lucille, intrigued, inquired about how they got it. Evans shared that a man once approached them to sell a disease-fighting sedative made from a magical poison. He wanted them to conduct clinical trials on the creatures housed at their school. As the head of monster management, Evans couldn't overlook anything that seemed off. The man then handed him an official document proving the drug's effectiveness. Evans remembered he still had it and pulled out the papers signed by the king. Suddenly, the document burst into flames right in front of them. Everyone recoiled in surprise. Lucille felt that magic was behind it and thought it was intended to wipe away the proof. Bernie asked who the man was. Evans replied that the man never revealed his name or affiliation, but regular people couldn't obtain national approval documents that easily. Evans believed the man was connected to the government. With the documents missing, they lost their evidence. Suddenly, someone showed up and shared a great idea. It was Scott, with the principal following him. Lucille felt anxious when she noticed Scott was hurt. Scott shared that a strange man had assaulted the principal's office and was likely the same person who had given them the medicine. In the midst of the battle, he noticed a symbol on the man's back. He mentioned it was from the kingdom's magical forces. The others found it hard to accept. The principal said the school was badly damaged, and even though Evans meant no harm, he couldn't let him go off on his own. He had to talk to everyone concerned. Evans took complete blame and vowed to clarify everything. While the others went for treatment, Scott shouted to Bernie. He mentioned that the stranger was aware of the Rodney Valley event and even knew Bernie's name. He inquired whether Bernie had seen anyone strange at that time. Bernie, taken aback, replied that he had no idea. Scott felt a wave of relief knowing that Bernie was okay. Meanwhile, Bernie began to reflect deeply. The creatures in Rodney Valley may not have come about on their own, much like this time. For reasons he couldn't grasp yet, there were individuals who intentionally sought to hurt families and friends. The man was familiar with Bernie and could return for him. Bernie understood that he had to become much stronger. With a determined look, he promised to safeguard all those who mattered to him. Before long, everyone began sharing their stories with the principal. She expressed her gratitude and briefly explained what she had grasped. The attacker and the one who provided the drug were actually the same individual. Based on the talent everyone witnessed, it was likely he belonged to the kingdom's magic team, or another equally powerful group. Scott then understood that the situation could be more complicated than they initially believed. The headmaster announced that the school would conduct its own inquiry and then close the meeting. Scott apologized and departed with his kids. Before heading out, the principal asked for Bernie. Scott informed his son that they would wait outside. Bernie lingered and took a seat with the principal. She expressed her regret for interrupting him so abruptly. Bernie replied that everything was okay and inquired if there was an issue. The principal had learned that his weapon was effective in soothing the raging monsters. Bernie shared that his power didn't come from just himself. He mentioned he had created a special tool using things he had borrowed from the academy. The principal requested to see it. Bernie quickly revealed the crossbow to her. She grinned while looking at it and remarked that it was an impressive creation. She thought he had inherited that talent from his parents. Bernie appreciated the compliment. She added that jobs for magical tool engineers were uncommon in their country. Up to this point, only expert wizards could make magical tools, and it took them many years to learn. Since only a handful of people achieved this level of skill, there was still a lot to discover about these enchanted items. Bernie hadn't noticed it before, but he figured he was achieving something remarkable. The power of a job in this world was truly incredible. The principal clarified that the academy had concentrated on magic and combat roles, which is why there were no students pursuing crafting jobs to help the academy thrive. She was curious about the role of a magical tool engineer. Bernie inquired about what she meant by that. After a while, Bernie stepped out of the principal's office with a look of surprise. The principal had shared positive remarks about him. Bernie realized he couldn't do it all by himself. He sensed that he had to put in more effort. As he walked outside, he saw the damaged courtyard from the event. Scott was there, assisting with the cleanup, and spotted him. Bernie wrapped up the meeting and noticed the courtyard was in disarray. Scott nodded in agreement, but with his skills in blacksmithing and Bernie's knack for repairs, they could sort out most of the chaos. He asked his son if they could team up, and Bernie said yes. The students pitched in to help tidy up too. Lucille saw someone coming. It was a friend of her father's. He had made it through, but his body was marked with wounds. Lucille applied her healing magic to help him recover. Bernie and Al kept lending a hand in the neighborhood when someone emerged from the side and signaled for Bernie to come over. They led him to the shed filled with monsters and requested his assistance in repairing it. Bernie quickly got to fixing things. A few students came up to Al and expressed their gratitude for helping them out earlier. Al mentioned that thanks weren't necessary since they were all supporting one another. However, the girl from earlier argued that it was something greater. A boy in the class mentioned that he learned something important by observing Al's dedication. He pointed out that whether someone is a friend or an enemy depends on how they feel and act, not how they look. The students vowed to become stronger so they could help others without thinking twice. Bernie, like Al, felt happy when he heard this. Al beamed with pride at them. He suggested they wrap up the cleaning fast. He even allowed them to pet his soft tail without charge. At the same time, Lucille approached Gina, who was sweeping by herself in the corner. Gina inquired whether she had completed caring for the guard, and Lucille affirmed that she had. Lucille mentioned that she returned to assist with the cleanup. She also wanted to know what would happen to the monsters Gina looked after. Gina replied that the principal had said they could keep them for the time being, but their restraints needed to be tightened, and the teachers would take care of them for a bit. Lucille wished that soon they could take care of the creatures together, because she wanted to make friends with them and give them some love. Gina was confident they could do it. Soon after, a bunch of girls strolled past and spotted Lucille. They rushed over, happy to find her unharmed. They admitted they were too frightened to step in and just observed from afar. They complimented her for her incredible bravery. Lucille mentioned that she didn't do a lot and that everyone pitched in. The girls urged her to stop downplaying her efforts. Gina waited silently until the girls turned to her. They said she was awesome and that they never thought she would have such amazing abilities. They introduced themselves and expressed their wish to be friends. Gina was taken aback at first, but still greeted them with a handshake. She shared her name and expressed how glad she was to meet them. Lucille felt joyful for her. Time went by. Eventually, at the academy gates, Lucille said goodbye to her family. She wrapped Bernie in another hug. The principal and Scott's friend also showed up to say goodbye. Bernie waved goodbye as their carriage drove away. On the journey back, Scott discovered from Bernie that the principal had asked him to join the academy. Bernie mentioned that the principal had said nice things to him, but today's event showed him that he still had room to grow. He believed the magical tools had great power, but they didn't fully work because his own skills weren't strong enough yet. Upon hearing that, Scott felt it was up to him to get better. He had allowed the foe to slip away right before his eyes. He noticed that he wasn't as agile as he used to be during his adventurer days. He promised himself he would make things right when he crossed paths with that man again. He realized he had to do something. He mentioned to Bernie a spot named Stone Village located in the Dragon region. He mentioned that he got support there when he started his journey as an adventurer. Close by there was a mine filled with magical ore. He mentioned that he was considering heading there soon for some training. He asked Bernie if he would like to come along. Bernie eagerly accepted and vowed to dig deep. Scott realized he had to keep his roots in mind to safeguard his family effectively. That evening, the principal shared the day's happenings at the academy with someone. She mentioned concerns about possible document forgery and the potential link to the kingdom's magic core, prompting her to inform a reliable royal family member. This guy was Matthias. The principal inquired if he had any information about it. Matthias claimed he had no idea, but he was really curious about the enchanted device the engineer had talked about. Out of nowhere, someone walked into the room without bothering to knock. Matthias mentioned he believed he had already sent everyone away. He then inquired of Minister Zolan about his reason for coming. Zolonian mentioned that he couldn't help but catch some concerning bits of their conversation, so he decided to join in. Matthias responded that this was helpful and inquired if the minister had any information about the latest happenings at the academy. The minister claimed he was unaware of anything, but he couldn't overlook the news about the magic core and the possible fake documents. He announced that he would launch a thorough investigation led by Crown Prince Baker, the first prince. Matthias felt a jolt of surprise. The minister inquired if that was okay. Matthias grinned and got to his feet. He agreed that it was okay and appreciated the assistance. He passed by the minister and mentioned that he would be gone for some time. He requested the minister to tell his brother about it. He mentioned that there was someone he had to meet, no matter what. Not long after the father and son arrived at the mining site with Al, Scott shared that Stone Village was once a quiet little spot, but the nearby mine brought in a lot of activity and people. Bernie thought the academy issue was behind them and believed his dad had taken him to gather magic ore. He was thrilled about the adventure. They had gone to ask Dorothy for permission. She thought Scott was going to see someone she recognized in Stone Village, and Scott mentioned he would be gone for a while. Bernie realized his dad had a different goal in mind and was curious about what it might be. When they stepped into the woods, Al shouted for Scott. Scott recalled that the woods by the village felt linked to the woods where they first encountered each other, so he inquired about its safety. He mentioned that the forest near the village was off-limits, but it should be fine as long as they kept their distance. Still, they had to remain vigilant. Their goal was just around the corner. The group finally arrived at Stone Village. Scott proposed that they meet the village chief first. As they strolled down the streets, Bernie felt a sense of discomfort seeing the shabby surroundings. He mentioned to his dad that the area seemed forgotten and nearly deserted. Al acknowledged that the vibe seemed lifeless. Soon after, they spotted a crowd of people huddled together. Bernie shouted to them, but the men shot him angry looks. They wanted to know who they were and what brought them there. They thought the crowd had come to mock them. Bernie stood still. Scott moved closer and clarified that they meant no trouble. He mentioned they were there to see Chief Zhu and were looking for directions. An elderly man nearby was taken aback and got to his feet. He made his way through the crowd and inquired if the speaker was Scott. He seemed happy to see him. Scott mentioned that it had been quite a while. The elderly man said he could barely believe how strong Scott had gotten. The two men then walked off, looking frustrated. The elderly man welcomed Scott in and expressed regret about the unfriendly villagers. Once inside, Zus inquired about how Scott had been. Scott mentioned that he had given up adventuring and was now operating a blacksmith shop in the royal capital. Zus figured he had finally found his place. He then inquired about the little boy and the large dog. Scott introduced the boy as his son, Bernie, and the dog as Al, their beloved companion. Bernie said hello to the elderly man. Zealous was taken aback to learn that Scott had a kid. Scott mentioned that Bernie was the second son and that he also had an older son and a daughter. The old man seemed pleased to hear that. Scott explained to Bernie that the elderly man was the village leader of Stone Village and his old mentor, Zeus. He mentioned that Zeus had been a remarkable adventurer and a talented fighter, particularly skilled in offensive magic. Zalus told him to halt because he was now just an elderly man. Bernie finally encountered his father's mentor and realized why his father had remained unfazed by a divine creature. Zeus noticed they had traveled far to see him. He felt sorry for the plainness of his home and wished he could have greeted them in a nicer way. Scott remarked on how much the village had changed since he last saw it and inquired about what occurred. Zeus clarified that 5 years prior, a significant cave-in had taken place at the Dion mine. Incredibly, everyone survived, but many were hurt. The mine was closed off, and with the supply route blocked, more people continued to leave the village. Scott was shocked that this had occurred. Meanwhile, Bernie saw something unusual. Bernie noticed it was the same moment they first met in the woods. He couldn't help but think it was strange that the event in the mine occurred at the same time as their encounter in the forest. Zeus went on to explain that the villagers had been anxious due to their tough circumstances and wished for forgiveness for their past unkindness. Scott reassured him that it was no problem. A woman brought tea, her expression showing pain. Scott expressed his gratitude, and she slipped away silently. He thought about whether she had been injured in the cave-in too. Zeus shared that she had been discovered lying near the forest recently and had no family or place to go back to. He wished they could keep working on rebuilding the village and enhancing their basic amenities. If all went smoothly, they might even have the chance to bring a doctor to live there. Upon hearing that, Scott and Bernie exchanged glances. With a sense of pride, Bernie assured the old man he would handle the repairs and dashed out the door. Zeus appeared puzzled. Scott chuckled and confidently informed the village chief that his son was the one true master of magical tools. Bernie took charge and repaired the water pumps until they appeared nearly brand new. A few kids spotted him and gestured towards the playground. Bernie swiftly fixed the seesaw and swing. The hurt woman from earlier observed Bernie and the kids for a brief moment before she walked away. Bernie spotted her, and a fresh thought sparked in his mind. While Bernie busied himself with repairs, Xylus remarked on how amazing it was to watch the boy fix so much so quickly. In a village with so few people working, it was a big boost. Scott mentioned they were just happy to lend a hand to the community. Zhu looked at him for a moment and said that Scott had a keen eye. Scott wanted to know if he really believed that. The elderly man surprisingly realized that Scott wasn't just there for a casual chat. Scott anticipated that he would see right through his true motives. He addressed Zeus not as the village leader, but as his mentor. Scott requested him to train him once more. With a frosty look, Zeus inquired about the reason. Scott shared that he had no regrets about giving up his adventurer's life, as he discovered purpose in being a blacksmith. He realized that, with his current abilities, he was unable to keep his family safe. This truth finally sank in. He wanted to get back the power he used to have as an adventurer and become even tougher. His kids had become strong people, each pursuing their own dreams. As their dad, he aimed to keep them safe from harm. He pleaded with his master for another chance to be trained. Noticing his disciple's genuine nature, Zealous gave Scott a light tap on the shoulder. He mentioned that Scott had grown into a great father during his absence, and that he also had a favor to return. Scott felt a sense of relief, but the old man cautioned him that the training would be tough. If Scott was still interested, he would prepare him again. Bernie approached the hurt woman from before. She anxiously inquired about what was happening. Bernie said sorry for interrupting her, and mentioned he came because he heard she was in pain. The woman agreed, but added that the people in the village were nice, so she was getting by. Bernie recalled he had some extra magic ore from crafting the staves. He mentioned he would create a tool to assist her with her healing, leaving her puzzled. Bernie invited her to take a seat. He pulled out some bandages, a piece of magic ore, and a tiny bottle of potion. He unleashed his energy, and the bright light surprised the woman. In an instant, a firm shape took form. Bernie mentioned that it would speed up her healing process. While it wasn't as powerful as true healing magic, it would still aid in her leg's recovery. The woman expressed her gratitude. Bernie even suggested that he could put the cast on her himself. Bernie was unfazed by the snake tattoos on her hurt leg. The woman expressed her gratitude once more and mentioned she had nothing to offer in exchange. Bernie smiled and said it was okay, happy that he could assist her. The woman paused briefly and then inquired about why Bernie had visited their village. Just as he was about to respond, a knock came at the nearby window. Scott was standing outside. Bernie stepped away. The woman expressed her gratitude once more, but her expression quickly darkened. Outside, Bernie inquired about the situation. Scott explained that there was a food warehouse at the village's edge and requested assistance in transporting the supplies. Bernie and Al both said yes. Zoo expressed gratitude for all their help. The buildings looked aged and tired, but the food situation had gotten a bit better. Recently, there was a new lord in charge of the Dion area. To begin with, the new lord ensured they got enough food. Upon hearing this, Scott wondered if the new lord was a person of significance. Zealous agreed and described the lord as someone reliable who prioritized the people. The lord was out on an inspection. When he came back, Zus wished Scott would welcome him. Scott said yes, as they planned to stick around for a bit. Out of nowhere, a voice called out close by. Everyone hurried to the entrance of the village. A blood-soaked man in armor pleaded for his master's aid. He staggered ahead and fell flat on his face in front of the crowd. Bernie was shocked to see a soldier covered in blood appear out of nowhere. He stood still as he watched the wounded man pleading for assistance. Scott saw that the soldier had made it to the village despite his injuries and guessed that the battle took place nearby. Zoo proposed heading out to help anyone still in trouble and asked a villager nearby to look after the soldier. Scott suggested they divide to look for clues. He mentioned having Al follow the scent of blood. Zell mentioned he had a plan for their destination. With that, they all set off together. They quickly noticed a group in the distance. Zeus figured it was the Lord's team and suspected something had gone wrong during their check. Bernie noticed an overturned carriage. Zella mentioned it belonged to the Lord and thought they had been ambushed by someone. Scott pulled out his knife, and Al cautioned everyone about the strong scent of blood, urging them to stay alert as they approached. When they arrived at the carriage, they spotted a massive boar nearby, its tusks stained with blood and wounded soldiers scattered around it. When Bernie spotted the huge beast, he understood something important about it. Just as he was about to think more, the boar charged at him again. Scott dashed ahead, aiming to take it down first. He leaped over the boar and hit the back of its head. The powerful blow knocked the creature to the ground. The wounded soldiers were stunned. Bernie was in awe as he watched his dad battle. Zoo noticed that Scott had struck a key spot perfectly, but the boar was not just any beast. It still appeared unharmed after the assault and twisted its body to knock Scott off balance. Just as the creature lunged at Scott, something shot through its head. Scott glanced over and noticed that Bernie had taken a shot with the crossbow. Despite this, the creature was able to rise once more. Bernie felt the crossbow was working better than ever and knew this was his chance. He wished for the shot to succeed. The creature fell quiet and hit the ground with a loud thump. Bernie felt a wave of relief wash over him that his plan had succeeded. A young man came up and complimented Bernie on his great performance. Zeus felt a wave of relief when he saw that Lord Matthias was safe. Matthias shared that they were ambushed while returning from an inspection. With only a handful of guards, it was a challenging situation. After his guard took down the monster, a dark cloud of smoke billowed from it and gradually disappeared. Matthias still found it hard to accept what he had seen and understood that Bernie had truly proven his worth. Bernie was curious about his words. Matthias talked about the events in Rodney Valley and at the Royal Academy, noting how Bernie's name had become well known in the royal capital. He never thought he would run into him this way. Bernie grabbed his hand and inquired about his identity. Zeus mentioned that the young man was Matthias, the present lord of Stone Village, and the second prince of the Latover Kingdom. Matthias expressed that he was pleased to meet them. Scott and Bernie were amazed to encounter the second prince like this. Before long, they trailed behind him to the mansion where he was lodging. Bernie was surprised to find such a grand house at the village's edge. It didn't seem like a fitting spot for a prince to reside. Matthias expressed his gratitude once more for rescuing them from a risky situation. Scott replied that they were glad to help and offered assistance with the soldiers if necessary. The prince thanked him for the offer, but mentioned that he had already entrusted the soldiers to Zoo, so they would be okay. Bernie had always thought of princes as tough and commanding, but Matthias appeared kind and genuine. Bernie was curious about why Matthias had invited them to his place. Matthias grinned briefly, then turned serious and asked for their help. This left Scott and Bernie feeling uncomfortable. Matthias shared that he had multiple reasons for being the leader of Stone Village. People acting strangely were spotted going in and out of the forest by the village, which was managed by the kingdom's magic team. He decided to look into it. He mentioned that it should have been almost impossible for regular people to get into a zone protected by the magic cores. Therefore, if the reports were accurate, it indicated that the magic core was intentionally letting shady individuals through. The probe into the forest where the magical poison first showed up had been ongoing for 5 years without resolution, and the involvement of Magic Corps members during the Academy event added to the oddity. When he attempted to explore the forest, he found himself in danger. Bernie suddenly understood that the earlier attack was intentional. Matthias turned to his assistant, Ranville, for clarification. Ranville revealed that the giant creature spotted in Rodeo Valley wasn't usually found there. Upon hearing about a monster that had suddenly changed at the Academy and witnessing the prince being attacked on the same day, their suspicions became clear. Matthias disclosed that the kingdom's magic team was responsible for making these giant creatures. Their role was to protect the secrets concealed in the forest. The creatures in Rodney Valley and at the Academy were probably experiments. He felt certain that all the events were linked together. Bernie found it tough to believe what he was hearing, and it got even more difficult when he discovered that the Magic Corps had attempted to kill a prince. Matthias gave a wry smile before revealing that the real intentions of the Magic Corps were still a mystery. The genius was positioned near the heart of the nation, a figure with the influence to dominate the entire region. He suspected it was someone who harbored a strong resentment toward the royal family. He sought Bernie's opinion because he wanted to use the power of Bernie's magical tools, which had already helped in 2 previous cases. However, Bernie was unsure if someone without experience like him could manage such an important national issue. Matthias saw the struggle in his eyes. He recalled that Bernie was the only magical tool engineer in the nation, and felt there was a purpose to that position, along with a reason for his own birth as the second prince. He had special duties that only he could handle, and he couldn't let anything disrupt the country. He wanted to keep his people safe and asked Bernie if he could assist in safeguarding everyone else too. He wished they could join forces to safeguard what mattered most to them. Bernie, a skilled magical tool engineer, understood that there were certain things only he could defend. He had faithful friends and, most importantly, a dear family. If his strength could be of any assistance, he wanted to share it. In his previous life, he never experienced love. However, in this new world, everyone around him has taught him the true meaning of love. He decided to assist the second prince. Scott grinned with pride, tightening his fist and vowing to lend his support too. Matthias expressed his gratitude to both of them, and, with that out of the way, he turned his attention to what to do next. He mentioned his desire to boost his forces and intended to head back to the royal capital for a reorganization. Bernie mentioned that he had trustworthy contacts in the royal capital who could help him. At the same time, the woman with the snake tattoo on her right leg had fully recovered. She went to the forest by herself and used magic to call a crow. She attached a note to its leg and released it into the air. As she saw her friend take off, a smile spread across her face. Before long, the school break began, and Lucille cheerfully bounced her way home. She wished to spend the extended break with her family or go somewhere fun together. When she got there, she saw her mom gathering laundry outside. Dorothy greeted her warmly. Lucille glanced around and inquired if everyone was indoors. Dorothy mentioned that everyone had headed to Stone Village and wouldn't return for some time. Lucille felt let down since she had hoped to enjoy the break with her family. Just then, Al showed up and seemed taken aback to find her there. Lucille swiftly wrapped her arms around him in a hug. Dorothy believed he had gone to Stone Village too. Al mentioned that he had gone back to the royal capital for work and would head to the village again soon. He arrived to inform them that it would take a while before everyone could return home. When Lucille inquired about the reason, he explained that a few events had occurred, and they were handling some problems. Lucille saw that he was being unclear, so she thought it would be a good idea to visit Stone Village too. She asked her mom if she could go. Dorothy chuckled softly, let her go, and wished them good luck. At the same time, Zach and Matthias exchanged a tense look. Bernie was anxious about the tense atmosphere around them. Just a few moments ago, he had taken Matthias and Ranville to the Adventurers Guild. He proposed that they check out the exclusive group known as Kaguru. Ranville recognized the name and recalled that they were a talented team famous in the royal capital. If they teamed up, they would be powerful backers for the second prince. Matthias felt a rush of excitement at the thought. When Bernie opened the door, he cautioned them about Zach's tough look, but assured them he was nice. Once they stepped into the hallway, Bernie felt the tense vibe and started to question what had gone wrong. He shouted for Zach, who spotted him and the guys at the door right away. Zach shot them a fierce look and instructed them to come upstairs with him. Matthias perched on a stool as Zach shot him a fierce look from the sofa, joined by the other kangaroo members. The atmosphere was quiet until Matthias broke the silence and introduced himself in Ranville. Zack asked sharply what a prominent person from the country wanted from people like them. He cautioned that the outcome could be unfavorable based on the response. Ranville felt a surge of anger and grabbed his sword. He scolded Zack for being disrespectful and warned him to choose his words carefully. Zack stood his ground, declaring that they didn't owe anything to rural folks who looked down on explorers. He turned to the prince and questioned if he was mistaken. Matthias quickly agreed. He pointed out that it was unrealistic to expect politeness from adventurers who earned their living by gathering and selling magical ore that the country was meant to oversee. Bernie understood that things had gone really wrong. He had totally overlooked the fact that Zack really didn't like the country. The atmosphere in the room thickened, and everyone sensed the rising tension. Matthias then clarified that his previous comments were just what other royals would typically express. He genuinely admired everyone who backed the royal capital. He noted that it was clear how the work of adventurers in transporting magic ore and supplies kept the capital's economy thriving. He wanted them to speak to him as equals. Zack sighed deeply and asked what the prince needed. Matthias reached out to Karoo, a team famous among adventurers for their talent and achievements. Cliff, feeling anxious, inquired about the type of cooperation being discussed. Matthias shared the latest events linked to the magic core and the unseen villain lurking within the nation. Joseph remained convinced that they had no reason to step in. Matthias believed this issue was probably linked to the decline in magic or resources. He couldn't just stand by and let the royal capital crumble while the citizens endured hardship. He expressed that those in charge were only focused on the nation and not on the people, which really upset him. He acknowledged that he lacked the influence to make a real difference. So, he requested their assistance. He got up and bowed, seeking their support. Ranville was taken aback and insisted that a king shouldn't bow to ordinary people. Matthias urged him to be quiet. He mentioned that being a prince didn't matter to him right then. To him, this was the right way to show respect as a person. Zack was taken aback and burst into laughter, surprising everyone in the room. He mentioned that he liked the idea and decided to join in. However, he had one question for the prince. Matthias encouraged him to ask whatever he wanted, so Zack inquired why he felt the need to safeguard others. Matthias seemed surprised for a second, but he quickly found a response. Later, in a woods close to Stone Village, Scott knocked down 12 trees with a single blow. As he looked at the damage in his own hand, he felt he had truly grasped the technique. Zealous was amazed that Scott picked it up so quickly. He attributed this to Scott's experience as an adventurer and his talent as a blacksmith. He urged him to be a good role model for his sons. Scott agreed to do so. After training wrapped up, Zeus chose to head back to the village on his own. He asked Scott to come along once everything calmed down. Scott expressed his gratitude to his master, then gazed at the sky before lying down to take a break. He sensed that his efforts would soon hit the mark. The following task was to boost his precision. At that moment, Zack arrived and teased Scott about how diligently he was putting in the effort. The rest of the kangaroo team was present too. Scott was taken aback that Zack agreed to the request, as he never expected Zack to support the key players. Zack felt restless when he discovered the link to the magic and circulation, especially after hearing that the royal capital was deteriorating. He also decided on his course of action after listening to Matthias's response to his inquiry. Matthias just wanted to know if someone really needed a reason to look out for others. Zack admired Matthias's courage as a prince and decided it was worth teaming up with him. Scott remarked that it was just like Zack. Zack responded that young people are focusing on what's important to them, so adults should offer support from the sidelines. Cliff joined Kangaroo, and Lucille arrived at Stone Village too, as she was a magic user as well. Scott had a slight smile on his face. Now that Zack was in charge, the team was ready to push ahead. Even though night had fallen, the workers in the mines continued their tasks. Bernie and the others crouched behind the trees in the nearby forest. He gave a nod to let the group know it was time to move. Scott and the others got it. Matthias and Ranville joined in too. They were ready to put their plan into action. Earlier, Matthias had filled everyone in on the details of the forest search. He mentioned that he preferred to steer clear of the magic core if he could. Ranville proposed that they separate to explore the enemy's locations throughout the vast space. Upon hearing that, Lucille used her magic. She mentioned that her detection magic would make it simple. She utilized it to find individuals. A big map popped up in front of her, and circles began to appear all over it. Bernie anticipated his sister's talent. Ranville was taken aback by her use of powerful magic. Lucille noticed that a lot of people were gathered in the middle of the forest and near the entrance of the deep mine. She estimated there were about 30 or even more. Some of the key members appeared to draw from the enchanting energy. Matthias grasped what they required. To uncover the truth, they needed to catch individuals who could provide evidence. It would be challenging if the targets ran off into the woods when they attempted to catch them all at the same time. Bernie proposed that they set some traps. He chuckled while pulling things from his magic bag, claiming the stuff he had could come in handy. Cliff inquired about the enchanted ore and ropes. Bernie tapped into his abilities and created a magical device from them. Zack inquired if this was the legendary magic device. Scott wondered how they would put it to use. Bernie instructed them to encircle the crowded spots with a special rope he made. This way, the targets wouldn't be able to get away. Zack asked him to let his team handle the trap setup. Lucille would also go ahead to find a precise spot for the mine. Scott would remain by her side as her protector. Bernie encouraged everyone to give their all. Matthias grinned at Bernie. As the crowd dispersed, he mentioned that Bernie had plenty of people he could rely on. Bernie paused for a bit and had a thought while they were waiting. He proposed that they chat, believing it might be simpler to open up to someone like him. Matthias expressed his gratitude and gave his head a gentle pat. Then, he made up his mind to share something with Bernie. As the king's health declined, Matthias and his brother took on more responsibilities in the government. They decided that his brother, the future king, would manage the key state matters, while Matthias, the second prince, would concentrate on revitalizing various regions. Their efforts were going smoothly until the magical poison showed up 5 years ago. Once they handed the investigation over to the magical core, progress came to a standstill. The no-go zone expanded after the cave-in, and these moves wouldn't have taken place without his brother's consent. Matthias attempted to reach out to him face-to-face, but his brother kept dodging him. Bernie believed that the crown prince was involved in the issue. However, Matthias was confident that his brother would never take steps that would cause the king pain. From his perspective, having been near him for so long, it felt odd. Matthias hoped that his brother's actions weren't genuine, and that someone was manipulating him like a marionette. Bernie felt it would be heartbreaking if Matthias had chosen to be attacked. Matthias insisted that wasn't true. He confessed he didn't have the bravery to accept that his brother could have changed, even though it impacted the entire nation. He regretted making it a family issue. Bernie mentioned that he struggled with a lot of difficult concepts, but he felt it was best to trust his brother. Matthias nodded in agreement. He mentioned that faith was his only remaining support. Bernie also noted that steering clear of regret was important to him. Trusting someone was the most powerful act a person could offer. He was confident that the crown prince had faith in Matthias too, as they were family that could never be replaced. Matthias nodded. He mentioned that he ought to have faith in his brother. Regardless of the choices his brother made or the roles they took on, they would always be family. Now, Bernie glanced at Matthias with concern. He was confident that Matthias shared his love for family. He wanted to trust in his family and keep them safe, so he motivated himself to give his all. At that moment, Zack signaled to everyone. The men by the mine entrance inquired about their identity and mentioned they were occupied with crucial tasks. Big heaps of magical ore were spread all over the place. When Cliff noticed this, he understood they were really using up the resources. Ranville informed the men that the mines were off-limits and that they were mining illegally. The men argued that they were employed and were simply doing their work. They told the group to go if they didn't want to get hurt. Matthias inquired about who employed them and how long they had been working in the mines. One of the men attempted to attack him. Ranville's fist hit the man in the face as he cautioned him to keep his hands off Prince Matthias and to know his role. The other miners hurried over and yelled that children shouldn't be in the mines. To everyone's surprise, Matthias stood up for himself quite well. Petty took down one miner and said, "Sorry for acting childish." Zack and Scott also took down several miners, but Scott grumbled that there were too many. Zack mentioned it was a nice way to get started. More miners showed up after they heard the commotion. One of them yelled that the pay wasn't worth it and attempted to escape, but Lucille's magic stopped them. She just called them slow. A few miners who were hiding attempted to slip away. Bernie felt anxious, but Al reassured him that they had set up traps in that area. The fleeing miners stumbled over the ropes and were stunned. They tumbled down one by one like bugs caught in a snare. Bernie was glad the traps had done their job. Lucille then mentioned they had finished clearing the area and proposed they head into the mine. They ventured further into the mine. Matthias was glad they had caught the workers and just needed to gather the proof. At that moment, Lucille felt more people nearby and alerted everyone that they were getting closer. Out of nowhere, a woman they recognized approached them, appearing hurt. It was the same woman he had seen earlier. Bernie was stunned when he recognized her. He was curious about why she had returned to the mines and how she got injured. The woman rushed over and knelt beside him, saying her child was still trapped inside and needed rescuing. Upon hearing that, Scott and Bernie exchanged glances and ventured further into the shadowy tunnels. She mentioned that the men likely employed a spell to disrupt recognition. Despite her natural talent for exploration, she couldn't locate them. She shared that the men discovered her gift and compelled her to search for precious magical ore. Scott recalled the village chief mentioning that a woman had been discovered unconscious close to the village. She claimed she had narrowly escaped, but chose to hide her troubles to protect the village from any threat. Bernie thought that her previous leg injury was a result of that escape. Still, Ranville wondered why she came back after successfully getting away. Matthias felt his assistant's uncertainty and spotted the tattoo on the woman. She started to weep and revealed that the men had taken her child, who was supposed to be in the royal capital, and were using the child to coerce her back into the mines. She mentioned that they warned her the child would die if she didn't come back. She said the child was held further inside, and she couldn't rescue them by herself. After her leg mended thanks to the enchanted device, she still couldn't defend herself. The woman guided the group into a vast area within the mine. She urged them to move a bit further. In that instant, Matthias unsheathed his sword and aimed the tip at the woman's throat. She stood still, and everyone around her paused, puzzled about what was going on. Matthias pointed out that no matter how good she was at changing her appearance, she couldn't cover up the bruise on her leg. The woman, feeling anxious, inquired about his meaning. He clarified that a person in the royal palace had a matching bruise. A magician famous for his tricks of changing appearances served as an assistant to Minister Zolan. He mentioned that her name was Aradine Crawford, the secretary to the minister. The woman paused for a moment. Then, her look transformed. She realized that the prince had seen through her and felt annoyed since she almost tricked them. Ranville was stunned when he recognized her in disguise. Bernie understood that it was all a deception. Audine inquired if they were genuinely curious about her intentions. She mentioned that her intention was to eliminate them for meddling with Zolan and for prying into things that were not their business. This made Matthias realize that Zolan was indeed involved in these happenings. Aradine mentioned it was okay to share because she intended to dispose of them regardless. She called it her little farewell gift before they moved on to the next life. She confessed that she had been overseeing the men extracting the powerful magic ore. When Matthias took over as the ruler of the land, she had to hide her identity and keep a close eye on the village. She just had to draw them in and complete her task. If they stayed unaware, their end would be swift and painless. She called them unfortunate. She mocked Matthias for not becoming king and for depending on a young friend who focused too much on minor injuries. Bernie inquired about the child she said had been taken. Audine grinned and confirmed that was correct. She clicked her fingers, and the earth trembled. A giant snake creature emerged from the depths, which she proudly called her offspring. She commanded it to consume everyone. The beast charged at Bernie and the rest. Zack calmly instructed everyone to get out of the way. Cliff and the others rushed in, fought the monster, and succeeded in wounding it. Bernie urged them to continue. Meanwhile, Joseph spotted something unusual. Walls formed around the snake creature. Cliff's attack stopped being effective and instead knocked him backward. Lucille noticed that the monster appeared to form a shield around itself using its own power. She was surprised it could do that. Aradine chuckled at them and declared that trying to cut the monster was pointless. She thought their attempts were silly. Zack chose to act. The creature charged at him, and he threw a punch, hitting it right on the head. He struck hard and straightforward to take it down. The creature crashed to the earth with a loud thump. Aradine asked them to hold on for a second, but Ranville didn't listen and swung his sword at her. She just managed to dodge in time, but the blade grazed her cheek. Ranville urged her to be calm. Audine shot back, calling him a stiff servant and grumbling about his always arrogant and annoying behavior. At that moment, the snake creatures rose again. Zack thought this was intriguing. One of the creatures picked something up in its mouth. Lucille felt a threat and warned everyone to step back. The creature unleashed a fiery breath, and everyone quickly understood it was fire. Flames erupted around them, enclosing everyone in a blazing trap. Joseph mentioned that they wouldn't survive for long if the fire kept growing in such a tight spot. However, Lucille found a silver lining, as they had now figured out the monster's trait. She cast her ice magic to freeze the giant snake, but the ice quickly melted due to the creature's intense heat. She and Joseph realized they had to come up with a new strategy. Bernie had a different opinion. It wasn't that they were out of options. There was a lot of valuable magic ore around, but to use his technique, they had to freeze the monsters in place and control the fire. Al cautioned that the entrance was being blocked by falling rubble. As the heat increased, Bernie realized they were short on time. Lucille and Cliff gave him a reassuring pat on the back. They asked him to let them handle the fire and promised to buy him some time if necessary. They assured him they were by his side for that purpose. Bernie understood that he had to act fast. Things were getting tough, but he had his friends by his side. He requested their support.